Hello and welcome to my channel, The Practical ADDIE. In this video, we'll be discussing the top 6 design processes and theories you must know as an instructional designer. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Noreen Sheikh, and I'm a veteran instructional designer with 20 years of ADDIE experience. I have a passion for instructional design, and I'm here to share my knowledge with you. I hope you find this video helpful. Kicking it off, we have ADDIE design process number 1, ADDIE. ADDIE is the number 1 design process that I see employers asking for experience in when looking at ADDIE job descriptions. ADDIE is utilized to help organize and streamline the production of the training. This process or methodology was developed in the 70s and is still most commonly used for instructional design. Let's take a deeper look at ADDIE. A in ADDIE stands for analysis. This is the first part of any project where you analyze the situation or the problem you're presented with. You can do this by doing a needs analysis. This could be as simple or as in-depth as the situation calls for. Your needs analysis should help you identify the training gaps that can address the problem you're solving. The first D in ADDIE stands for design. Based on what you learned in the analysis phase, this is where you make decisions that lead to the best possible learning experience for your identified audience. This includes decisions on the mode of training delivery and a rough storyboard. The second D in ADDIE stands for development. In this stage, you will finalize your storyboard and using the storyboard, create the training, whether it's an e-learning or a webinar or a live classroom training. By the end of this stage, you should have all of your main training content and any supporting documentation or content ready to go. The I in ADDIE stands for implementation. In this phase, you release the training or distribute the training to your intended audience. So for example, if it's an e-learning course, you may release it on your LMS or your learning management system in this phase. And finally, the E in ADDIE stands for evaluation. In this phase, you evaluate if the learning outcomes you set out to achieve were met, and if the problem you were asked to solve with your training was solved indeed. We will discuss Kirkpatrick's different levels of evaluation later in this video, which you can certainly utilize in this phase. The second most known ADDIE design process is SAM. As you saw, the last design process, ADDIE, uses a linear or waterfall approach, which is not suitable for agile environments. SAM was created specifically to address the changing needs of a process by using an iterative approach. SAM, which stands for Successive Approximation Model, is an agile development model. There are 3 phases in SAM: preparation, an iterative design phase, and an iterative development phase. The first stage of SAM is the savvy start, or the preparation phase. This usually starts with a cross-functional or collaborative brainstorming session. In this phase, you establish the project basics, timeline, meeting cadence, and so on. In the iterative design phase, there are generally 4 steps. You design a prototype of the training and then review it. All ideas are discussed and evaluated. Next, you take the design prototype and move to the alpha stage, which is a complete version of the instructional application. Next, you go into the beta stage, which is a version incorporating feedback from the alpha stage. Finally, we go into the gold stage, which incorporates revisions and feedback from the beta stage. As you see, the iterative design phase has 3 cycles. The iterative development phase is where the magic happens. Here, you as an ADDIE are generally the project lead, and you work with all parties to collaboratively go through the develop, implement, and evaluate phase. Again, you go through the alpha, beta, and gold steps, and then have your final product. Again, the iterative development phase also has 3 cycles. The advantage of using this approach is that if a change needs to occur at any time, it can happen quickly without having major effects on the project, like timeline deviation or budget change. This brings us to design process number 3 and my personal favorite design process, the LLAMA process, are a lot like Agile management approach process. In my opinion, the LLAMA process is a lot like ADDIE but modified for an Agile approach. In the first stage of this design process, you start with the analyze, design, and develop cycle and move into the implement phase just like ADDIE. However, this is where you evaluate and then go back to design and develop based on your learnings from your implementation and evaluation. This cycle is repeated again until you get the desired end result. All right, so now that we have discussed the top 3 design processes, let's transition into the 3 most important theories that you should be familiar with as an IDE. The first one being adult learning theory, and in particular Androgogy. If you have never developed training for adults, it's really important to understand that developing training for adults is very different from developing training for children. Malcolm Knowles was an American educator who developed the use of the term Androgogy. According to Knowles, Androgogy is the art and science of adult learning. There are 4 principles of Androgogy here that are important to keep in mind when you're developing training for adults. Principle number 1 is that adults need to feel that they have a role in planning and or evaluation of the training they're receiving. Principle number 2 is that adults bring their own life experiences to the table, and these experiences form the basis of their learning. Principle number 3 is that adults will learn best and will be most interested in training that has an immediate relevance to them and impacts their job or day-to-day lives. Principle number 4 states that adult learning is problem-centric rather than being content-centric. Adults look for ways information will solve a problem over just getting facts. Keeping these 4 simple principles in mind is key to developing good training for adults. The second most useful theory as an IDE that I personally utilize when creating corporate training is Bloom's Taxonomy. In 1956, Benjamin Bloom, along with other collaborators, published a framework for categorizing educational goals called Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, commonly known as Bloom's Taxonomy. This framework is used to this day for instructional development. I use Bloom's Taxonomy extensively when I'm creating a set of learning objectives for my training. Bloom's Taxonomy contains 6 levels of learning. These are remembering, such as retrieving, recognizing, recalling; understanding, which means the learner can construct meaning from verbal, written, or graphic information to classify, summarize, infer, compare, and explain; applying, like carrying out, executing, or using a procedure or a method; analyzing, breaking down content to determine how parts relate to each other or to the overall structure and being able to organize an attribute; evaluating, which is arriving to a conclusion or making a judgment based on information presented through checking and critiquing; and finally creating, putting elements together or reorganizing elements to create a functioning plan, structure, or production. Bloom's taxonomy is hierarchical, which means that the higher levels are dependent on attaining the lower levels first. In this case, creating is the highest level and remembering is the lowest. The third theory that I feel like is absolutely a must-know for an IDE is Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. Again, I use this on a constant basis when preparing training in a corporate setting. Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation definitely come into play when you're evaluating the training you created. There are 4 levels of Kirkpatrick's evaluations. The lowest level of evaluation, or level 1, is a reaction, or how much did the participants like the training, found it engaging or relevant. An example of this is a survey that you can send to the students after a training that gauges the aspects mentioned. So this level is truly a reaction to the training and does not test the trainee at all on the actual content of the training. Level 2 is learning. This level is the one that gauges the degree to which the trainee learned or acquired the knowledge they were intended to acquire in the training. An example of this is an assessment that tests the knowledge of an employee on harassment policies of the company after they've sat through that corporate training e-learning module. Level 3 is behavior, and this looks at the degree to which a trainee can apply what they learned in the training once they're back on their job. An example for this level is the training, for example, took the learner through a simulation of how to operate a piece of machinery. And then level 3 will look at how well the learner can now go back and operate that particular piece of machinery based on the training they took. Level 4 measures the degree to which the targeted outcome occurs as a result of the training. For example, a particular product training provided to the sellers leads to a certain percentage of revenue growth for that product. This is an example of level 4 evaluation. So you may be wondering which level is right for you to use for your training. And the simplest answer to that question is that it totally depends on your learning outcomes or your learning objectives that you established in the beginning of the design phase. So let's take a quick review at the IDDIE design processes and theories that we talked about in this video. So number 1 design process is ADDIE. ADDIE is utilized to help organize and streamline the production of the training. It was developed in the 70s, and it's still most commonly used for instructional design. Number 2 design process is SAM. As you saw, ADDIE uses a waterfall or a linear approach, which is not suitable for Agile environments. So SAM was created specifically to address the changing needs of a process, and it uses an iterative approach. Number 3, or the LLAMA process, also called Lot-like Agile Management Approach process. That's a mouthful. The LLAMA process allows you to work in the style of ADDIE, but also to learn and adapt from changes. Next, we talked about 3 important theories. The first one being adult learning theory, and in particular Androgogy. Keeping the 4 principles of Androgogy in mind is crucial to developing training for adults in the corporate world. Second, Bloom's taxonomy. This is extremely useful when creating a set of learning objectives for training. And Bloom's taxonomy contains 6 levels of learning, and it's hierarchical. Finally, Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. These levels are utilized when you're evaluating your training and depend on your decided training outcomes. So there you have it, folks. The 3 most important IDDIE design processes and IDDIE design theories that you must know as an IDDIE, in my opinion. I hope you found these tips helpful. If you have further questions, you can find me at thepracticaliddie.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. I would love to hear from you. What other topics about instructional design do you want to see videos on? I post a new video regularly, so come back and check often. Thank you.